Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where shadows linger longer than they should, and every silence carries the weight of a forgotten name. In the heart of temples, behind saffron robes and sacred chants, lie secrets the living were never meant to unearth. Some stories are whispered only in candlelight, passed from monk to novice in hushed breath, just before the flame flickers out. Tonight, you'll hear one such tale, a tale not of death, but of refusal, of a holy man whose soul would not depart, of fire that would not burn. This is the monk who refused cremation when the fire wouldn't burn. There is a silence that doesn't feel like peace. It lingers too long, stays too still. And in the wooden halls of Wat Nun Tat, nestled in the humid forests of Ubon Ratchathani, that silence came just before dawn, when Master Sutham took his final breath, or what should have been his final breath. The monks were already kneeling. The novices had gathered. The old man had been sick for weeks, his body curled beneath cotton robes, skin stretched like old parchment over trembling bones. He had stopped eating days ago. The doctor from the village had long given up on medicine, instead kneeling at the foot of his mat, whispering chants and lighting incense as if preparing for a passage rather than a recovery. And then, nothing. Not a cough, not a gasp, not even the raspy rattle the dying sometimes leave behind. Master Sutham simply stopped. His eyes remained open, clouded but focused, staring not upward, not into any distant heaven, but to the far wall of the kuti, the small wooden monk's hut where he had lived alone for decades. No one dared move. The silence pressed like humidity on skin, thick and patient. It was novice Phra Chai who finally crept closer, barefoot, trembling. He reached out with hands too young to touch the dying and gently pressed 2 fingers against the old monk's neck. No pulse. But the body, it was still warm, almost too warm, as if the heat inside him refused to leave. "Ajahn," Chai whispered, a foolish question to ask a corpse. Yet in that moment, with the elder monk still sitting upright, eyes half glazed, lips parted just enough as if to look as though he were still murmuring a prayer, it felt wrong to treat him as dead. A bell tolled from the temple courtyard, the cremation bell, but it rang only once, then silence again. No chants were sung that day. Instead, the abbot, a weary man named Luang Pi Kamon, ordered the body to be washed and wrapped. But when they lifted Master Sutham from his seat, something in his spine resisted bending. His limbs did not sag like meat. They held their form, stiff as if held by invisible hands. Even the rigor mortis that came to all others did not look quite like this. His mouth had frozen open, in what seemed not a grimace, but the beginning of a smile. The temple was no stranger to death. Elder monks had passed here before, bodies burned on pyres built with sandalwood and sacred leaves, ashes collected in gold-lined urns stored beside relics from Burma, Laos, and Cambodia. But this death felt like an interruption, a pause, as if Master Sutham was waiting for something more. That night, the temple fell quiet, too quiet. The jungle's usual song, frogs, insects, wind whistling through banana leaves, had dulled. The novices couldn't sleep, and some whispered that they heard something from the crematorium, even though the body had not yet been brought there. A low breathing, a click of beads, and once
a throat clearing in the dark. Luang Pi Kamon told them it was just nerves, that grief could echo, that they should meditate and sleep. But the novice Fra Chai did not sleep. He sat beside Master Sutham's wrapped body. He couldn't look away, not because of fear, but fascination. The scent of the room had changed, not to the sour rot of death. No, it smelled burned, but nothing had been lit. When Chai reached to adjust the linen cloth that covered the old monk's face, he paused. The edges were warm, as if the fabric had been left near fire, and beneath it, the faintest whisper, something like air escaping lungs, escaped the mouth of the man who no longer breathed. In the days that followed, preparations began. The villagers were invited. Candles were arranged in a circle. Saffron banners with golden text fluttered along the cremation field. The pyre was built with care, each log selected, dried, and sanctified. This was a monk who had served for 62 years, who had studied under masters that no longer lived, who had once fasted for 90 days without uttering a single word. He was revered, adored, feared even. And now he was gone, or so they thought. The night before the cremation, the abbot went alone into the forest. He returned with a bundle of white lotus and a scroll, a relic rarely touched, a prayer to guide the soul beyond, a fire hymn whispered only during special rites. But as he knelt to practice the chant, a wind passed through the temple grounds. It shook the bells, snuffed out several lanterns, and in that darkening quiet, the relic room door creaked open, though no one had touched it. Luang Pi Kamon didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, he would oversee the cremation. The whole village would come, and they would try, with fire and faith, to return Master Sutham to the ash from which all things rise and fall. They did not yet know that that fire would refuse, and something far older, far heavier than death would remain.
The sky that morning was the color of damp ash, neither gray nor white, but heavy with a silence that clung to the skin like wet silk. Villagers arrived early, carrying offerings of jasmine garlands, coconut milk, and folded robes. Their faces were solemn, eyes lowered. Even the children were quiet. None ran, none played. Something in the air warned them this was not a day for laughter. At the center of the cremation grounds, the pyre stood tall. It was built in 3 layers, each bound with palm rope, the wood stacked with ceremonial precision. Dried tamarind leaves had been tucked between the logs to encourage the flame. A small bottle of monk-made camphor oil was placed near the base, meant to anoint the wood just before ignition. Master Sutham's body had been wrapped in layers of white cloth, then robed again in his final saffron. A golden fan bearing his ordination name, Pra Sutam Chantipalo, was propped beside his head. His hands had been positioned in the dhyana mudra, palms folded in meditation. But despite the ritual perfection, something felt wrong. His skin had not paled. His chest, though unmoving, looked neither collapsed nor sunken. And worst of all, the scent. It was not decay, nor sanctity. It was the scent of heat, as if the fire had already begun, within. The abbot arrived last, wearing an older robe, deep ochre in color, stitched by hand many seasons ago. He carried the scroll, the fire sutra, rolled tightly, bound with red twine.
Luang Pi Kamon said nothing as he climbed the small bamboo platform beside the pyre. He looked down at Master Suthum's face, still slightly smiling, the lips barely parted. The crowd of villagers held their breath. The first chant began. Yatha namam, tatha bhavam. As the name, so the becoming. A novice lit the ceremonial incense and circled the pyre clockwise 3 times. The smoke twirled like threads in the morning air. Then, one by one, the monks stepped forward, offering pinches of sandalwood and strands of dried lotus stems, placing them gently atop the body. When it was done, Luang Pi Kamon gave the signal. The novice, young Chai, took the torch. He paused just long enough to feel the wood in his hands begin to tremble, not from within, but as if something unseen outside was touching the flame. Then he leaned forward and lit the pyre. Flames licked the logs with eagerness. Dry leaves hissed, popped. Smoke began to spiral upward in graceful sways. The villagers sighed, bowing their heads in prayer. But minutes passed, then more and more. The fire grew, but only around the body. The wood crackled, the frame blackened, but Master Suthum's robes did not ignite. Not a thread curled, not a single hemline browned. And his face, his expression remained unchanged, as if untouched by heat. It was novice Pra Samet who first noticed. Look, Ajahn robes, they're not burning. Others began to stir. Eyes widened. The old woman who sold herbal tea crossed herself. A mother pulled her daughter behind her. The flames grew higher. Now the logs at the center should have collapsed. The fire roared, sparks flying, and yet no smoke came from the monk himself. Only the wood burned. Only the structure failed. The body remained. Luang Pi Kamon's voice trembled as he continued the chants. Sabe samkara anicca. All conditioned things are impermanent. He repeated it, louder, steadier, but the fire began to resist. The wind shifted strangely, blowing inward toward the pyre from every direction, like 1,000 breaths feeding it without control. A sudden crack. The upper log split. The fan bearing Master Suthum's name collapsed into the flame, and yet did not catch fire. Pra Chai stepped back in horror. The heat now felt unnatural, not painful, but in reverse. It wasn't burning them, it was pulling warmth from the air. The abbot closed the scroll. The chanting stopped. Silence returned once more. And within that silence, Master Suthum's eyes moved. Not fully, just a twitch beneath the lids, barely visible, but enough. Enough to unsettle every soul present. That night, the pyre was left smoldering. The logs had burned to charcoal. The platform had collapsed inward. But when the monks returned, they found the body seated upright on a bed of unburned ash. His robes remained clean. The edges of the cloth were not even singed. A novice wept. Another fled the temple grounds entirely. Luang Pi Kamon stared at the scene, lips trembling with words he refused to say. Later, in the abbot's quarters, the elders met. None spoke above a whisper. This is not sainthood, said Pra Rayan, the temple's historian. This is resistance. We've heard of this before, said Pra Paitun, the oldest. From the texts kept sealed in Chiang Rai, the unburning, the fire refusal, it is not a blessing. Then what is it? asked Pra Kamon, though he already knew. Pra Paitun lowered his eyes. A weight, a soul too heavy to rise, a karma too tangled to let go. By morning news had spread. Villagers came not to mourn, but to watch. Some knelt in awe, calling it a miracle. Others stayed at the tree line, whispering about curses, debts, and sins that refused to rot. The monks, confused and frightened, decided to move the body, not to bury, not to try again, but to hide it beneath the prayer hall, where ancient relics once rested. But even as they carried him, his body still upright, stiff yet strangely light, some claimed to hear a sound beneath the linen, a whisper, a chant not in any known tongue. And in that moment, even the abbot flinched. The fire had failed, the body had not, and Master Sutham, long thought silent, had become something else entirely, something that watched, something that waited, something that would not burn.
Ash is sacred. In Buddhist funeral rites, it is the final distillation of life, a pure offering, the soft remains of all that once breathed, moved, and meditated. Families collect the ash in gold urns or clay pots, sometimes scattering it into rivers, other times placing it in temple crypts, believing the soul has moved on, light and unbound. But this time, there was no ash, only the smoldered frame of a pyre that had failed to do what it had always done. The villagers didn't speak of it openly, but whispers moved like smoke through the markets and rice fields. Some claimed it was a sign, others an omen. One old man near the edge of the forest, known for feeding crows with sticky rice, claimed he'd seen a flame spiral backward, not outward as fire should, but inward, curling toward Master Sutam's chest, then vanishing without a trace. Another woman, a widow who lived alone beside the river, said she dreamed of the monk the night after the failed cremation. He was sitting under a Bodhi tree, she murmured, trembling. But the tree was upside down. The roots reached for the sky. And he was crying, only he had no eyes. She refused to come near the temple after that. Back at Wat Nong Tat, the monks had sealed the body inside a reliquary chamber, a space meant for sacred relics, not corpses. They wrapped Master Sutam in fresh cloth, laced it with crushed sandalwood and powdered camphor. Charms were placed around the chamber, red strings, folded leaves, coins marked with ancient script. They locked the door, lit no candles inside, left the room untouched. And yet the scent of smoke lingered always near it, as if fire was waiting somewhere just beneath the wood. Novice Pra Chai, who once adored Master Sutam like a grandfather, now found himself unable to sleep, not because of fear, but a deep confusion that pressed on him like wet soil. He remembered the lessons. All things must burn, Master Sutam had once said. Not just the body, but the name, the self, the silence. Why then would he not burn? 3 days after the cremation failed, the temple held another funeral, this time for an elderly laywoman who had passed peacefully in her home. Her body burned as expected, the pyre lit with a soft crackle. Her children wept. The ashes fell like rain. The ritual closed with warm chants and cool wind. But as the monks turned to collect the ash, they saw something buried among the embers. Not bone,
not cloth, but a sliver of orange fabric, saffron, identical to a monk's robe, and within it, a small blackened bead from a mala, prayer beads used only by those in the higher Sangha, only by masters. But this woman had not been a nun. She had never ordained. It was a piece of Master Sutam's beads. Pra Paitun, who oversaw the ceremony, said nothing. He quietly took the bead, placed it in a silk pouch, and returned to the reliquary. He placed the pouch beside the door and whispered, "Return what you've taken." That night, a storm came. Not rain, but wind. Fierce, circular, like breath from an unseen lung. The temple bells rang without rhythm. Doors creaked. Statues shook. Candles lit earlier in the night were found extinguished, their wax spilled as if something had slapped them. One monk saw the statue of Pra Upagupta, the protector against evil, tilt forward slightly, as if bowing. When he approached it in the morning, he found a small handprint of ash smeared across its chest. Meanwhile, the villagers began to murmur with greater certainty. He was cursed, they said. He broke his vow. Something is still inside him. And worst of all, it's not that the fire failed, it's that the fire obeyed. The abbot, Luang Pi Kamon, grew thinner. His voice was hoarse from nightly chanting. He avoided the reliquary room entirely now and slept in the bell tower where wind could reach him freely. He began researching old scrolls, texts written in Pali, Sanskrit, and even forgotten tribal dialects. He contacted temples in Chiang Mai, Ayutthaya, and as far as Luang Prabang. He asked one question over and over. Do you know a body that would not burn? Most said no. One wrote back, not the body, but the spirit. If it is clinging, if it is angry, if it has been invited to stay. Another said, only when the soul is divided, part wants to go, part refuses. And one, an unnamed letter with no return address, simply read, you locked him in, but you did not ask him why he stayed. On the 7th day, Novice Pra Chai was found sitting before the reliquary chamber, eyes wide open, hands still pressed together in a Y of reverence. He had not moved in hours. When shaken, he whispered one line before fainting. He's still chanting inside. They broke open the door. No sound, no breath. But in the ash before the monk's folded feet were footprints, small, bare, blackened, leading nowhere, as if something had stepped out and then simply vanished. They began sweeping the temple daily after that. They found more beads, a fragment of burnt nail fangle, a folded petal turned to soot, signs that the body was not still, but gently moving, existing in both presence and absence. The body would not burn. The ash would not come. And yet, he was moving towards something. Pra Ruan, the historian, finally spoke up in morning prayers. Do you know, he said softly, what happens when a monk dies with a burden he never confessed? No one answered. Ruan stared at the incense curling toward the cracked ceiling. He doesn't become a ghost, he becomes a lesson. And so the whispers spread across villages, between temples, into city newspapers that dared not print the full truth. There was a monk in Uban Ratchathani who refused cremation, who sat untouched by flame, who stayed long after the breath had ended. There are certain hours of the night when temples breathe differently. Between midnight and the third hour before dawn, when the air grows still and crickets cease their choir, Wat Nong Tat took on a quality more ancient than stone or incense. It was the time monks called Brahma Muhurta, the Brahma hour, a sacred window where the soul listens more than speaks. And yet, one night during that hush, novice Phra Chai heard something he was never meant to hear. He had stayed up late again, unable to sleep, his mind a bowl filled with too many questions and no still water. He sat outside the reliquary chamber, clutching his beads too tightly. He wasn't praying, not really, just moving his fingers out of habit, the way a child grips a rope while crossing a narrow bridge. The sky above was black velvet, with no stars that night. The moon had vanished behind thick clouds. Even the wind seemed cautious. And then it came. At first, it was only a low murmur, so faint that it could have been mistaken for wind slipping through cracks in the wood. But it had rhythm. And then words. Not Thai, not Pali, not Sanskrit. Not even words, really. Syllables that seemed reversed, unwound, as though someone were chanting backward. Na, tha, vi, sa, Phra Chai sat frozen. The voice came not from the reliquary room, but from beneath the floorboards, low, hollow, moving. He pressed his ear to the plank. The sound grew clearer, the same line over and over, the syllables turning in on themselves like a prayer spinning into ash. Then silence. Then a second voice, this one higher, not male, not female, just thinner, like air pushed through lips that hadn't spoken in decades. It echoed the chant, but after, as if learning. Na, fa, vi, sa, Then again, louder, more confident. And then they chanted together. Phra Chai stumbled backward. His knees scraped on the wood. He ran, silently but quickly, through the corridor, past the Buddha hall to the bell tower where Luang Pi Karmon slept. But the abbot was already awake. "Did you hear it?" Chai asked, panting. The abbot nodded slowly. "I hear it every night now." In the morning, the novice said nothing to the others, but he began writing what he could remember on scraps of palm leaf manuscript. He repeated the chant in his mind, trying to find its meaning, but each time he spoke it aloud, he felt his mouth go dry. His heartbeat slowed. Time felt strange. One night, after copying the syllables again, he looked up and found his ink bowl frozen solid, in the heat of a Thai summer. The abbot consulted the elder monks. Pra Hruen had heard of such chants before, mentioned only in footnotes of ancient scrolls from lost forest temples. Sankara Vishuddhi Bhasma, he whispered, the purifying ash, a hymn used not to cleanse a soul, but to weigh it down. To hold it? Hruen nodded. To prevent it from leaving. From that night on, no novice was permitted near the reliquary chamber after sunset. But the sound didn't stay confined. Now it echoed faintly through the walls of the prayer hall. It fluttered in the silence between morning gongs. Sometimes it seemed to hum from the hollow bell itself when no one had rung it. Villagers visiting the temple grew restless. One man claimed he heard the chant coming from his own rice barn that night after visiting Wat Nong Tat. Another swore his newborn spoke 3 syllables of it in her sleep. A woman vomited ash. The monks began losing sleep. Dreams blurred into waking hours. Pra Paitun dreamt of sitting in the reliquary, chanting beside a younger version of Master Sutam who offered him fire that burned blue. Pra Samet dreamt of eyes inside the Buddha statue, open, blinking. Pra Hruen stopped dreaming altogether and aged what looked like 10 years in 3 nights. Then one night, Pra Chai vanished. His robes were folded neatly beside the reliquary door. A trail of ash led to the edge of the staircase. There were no prints leaving the building. Only one word carved in the wooden floor with a fingernail. Inside. They found him 3 days later, not in the temple, not in the village, but in the ancient, abandoned shrine deep in the jungle, one that hadn't been visited in decades. He was kneeling before a broken statue, naked, smeared in ash, murmuring the backward chant in perfect rhythm. His eyes were open, but empty. When they brought him back, he did not resist, but he spoke only one sentence over and over until his voice failed. He's not alone anymore. Pra Chai was kept under watch after that, placed in the novice quarters under silent meditation. He ate little, slept less, but he smiled often, just like Master Sutam. The abbot no longer rang the morning bell. He said the sound now came from below. And when asked what they should do, what prayer might stop the chant, he simply whispered, "You cannot silence something that has become the silence itself." From that week onward, the monks began marking time not by sunrise or gong, but when the chanting began. Because it always did, always at midnight, always in unison, and always one voice stronger than the rest.
Temples are built with more than brick and stone. They are built with breath of prayers, chants, and whispers. They are built with the weight of names spoken at dawn and forgotten by dusk. And in their sacred hollows, they carry things not meant for the sun to see. At Wat Nong Tat, the reliquary chamber had once held bones of saints, cracked relics wrapped in silk, and slivers of wood said to come from the Bodhi tree itself. Now it held something different. Not a relic, not a saint, but something that would not leave. After the second week of failed cremation and strange chanting, the monks decided to seal the reliquary door. Not lock it, seal it. With prayer threads, protective scripts, and the wax of 100 candles gathered from the temple's oldest shrines. They recited the Parita, a long sequence of protective verses meant to shield against harm. They placed small statues of guardian deities at the 4 corners of the room. Luang Pi Kamun wrote a final invocation with red ink made from powdered cinnabar and lotus sap, scrawled across the lintel above the door. Where the fire halts, let silence hold. Where silence breaks, let no soul unfold. They placed a bronze medallion of Pra Upagupta on the door's center. It pulsed with strange warmth, even in the cool morning air. Then they nailed the door shut. 7 nails, 7 prayers, each one delivered with trembling hands. The room fell silent after that. No chanting, no ash trails, no beads out of place. But peace, when forced, always hums with tension. For days, the temple seemed to breathe easier. Villagers returned to pray. The novices laughed again, though not as freely as before.
Chai remained silent in his recovery hut, eyes sometimes tracking things that weren't there. But on the 9th day after the sealing, the bees arrived. Not in a swarm, but in a slow crawling trickle. First 1, then 3, then a cluster. Each one emerged from the inside of the sealed reliquary, squeezing through unseen cracks in the frame, their wings coated in what looked like soot. Some were dead, others twitched. A few buzzed in lazy spirals, crawling across the lintel where the red ink had begun to fade. By dusk, the lintel was black with the husks of bees. Their wings beat against the door like rain. And then they all stopped at once. The ground grew still. The monks stared at one another, too afraid to move. And then came the sound. A low tap from inside the reliquary. Then again, tap, tap, like knuckles brushing wood, not pounding, just reminding. Luang Pi Kamun ordered the novices out. Only the 4 senior monks remained. They circled the door, each holding an unlit candle and a bowl of salt. Pra Ruen began to chant, but his voice cracked. He looked to the abbot. I can't remember the words. You know the Metta Sutta? Kamon urged. Ruen shook his head. No, I mean, they're gone, as if they were never there. The candles refused to stay lit. Each time a flame flickered to life, it was snuffed out instantly, as though the wick itself exhaled. Finally, Kamon placed his palm flat on the door. It was warm and vibrating, not shaking, but pulsing, like a heartbeat. That night, the reliquary was left alone, but by dawn, the door was no longer sealed. All the charms were untouched, the nails still driven in place, but the bronze medallion had fallen to the ground, its surface cracked straight down the center, and on the floor before it lay a single saffron thread, fresh, unfrayed, still warm to the touch. They gathered again, arguing quietly. Open the door, said Pra Paitun. Let us see if the body remains. And if it doesn't? Asked Ruen. Kamon looked at them both. If he's not there, then something else is. But they didn't open the door. Instead, they did what monks have done for centuries in times of fear. They tried to make offerings. At the threshold, they left rice, water, a lotus, a folded robe, and lastly, a candle, already lit, placed on an iron dish to shield it from wind. Then they waited. 1 hour, then 2, then night. In the morning, the rice had spoiled. The water had turned red. The lotus had bloomed. And the candle was gone, dish and all. No one spoke of it, but every monk began praying with more urgency. Some cried, some fasted, others wandered the woods muttering old hymns as if searching for a forgotten melody that might break a curse. The reliquary stayed closed, but every day something new appeared in front of it. A child's tooth, a beetle made of ash, a string of prayer beads missing its final bead, and once, just once, there appeared a black feather scorched at the tip, quivering in a spot of wind that came from nowhere. Pra Chai, now allowed to walk the grounds again, passed the sealed room one evening. He paused, staring at the door, then whispered, without turning, "He's not waiting for us to open it. He's waiting for us to invite him out." No one entered, no one opened, but the door had begun to breathe. In, out. Not visibly, Not audibly, but you could feel it when you stood close enough. The way the air moved, the way your skin cooled, the way your chest involuntarily matched the rhythm. In, out, as if something on the other side was slowly becoming the silence itself, and waiting.
Some fires are not lit with matches. They are sparked by confession, by guilt, by memory. And in the deep folds of Thai forest temples, there exists a forgotten rite, one not meant to ignite the body, but the soul, to purge what even flame cannot reach. They called it the Fire Sutra, a chant that burns inward. It was Phra Rune, the temple's historian, who first mentioned it by name. He had gone into the oldest archives, scrolls left untouched for decades, brittle with age, wrapped in palm fiber and bound with string dyed in ochre. Most monks believed these were texts only meant for scholars, long-forgotten rituals eclipsed by modern teachings. But not Rune. He was looking for something unholy, and he found it. The scroll was wrapped in black silk and sealed with a knot that should have crumbled years ago, but hadn't. Inside were 3 pages, no title, no diagrams, just verses written in a dialect older than Pali, more curved than Sanskrit, almost serpentine in its brushstrokes. But Rune could read it, not because he knew the language, but because the words seemed to whisper themselves into him. He brought the scroll to Luang Pi Kamon at midnight, laying it out on the stone floor of the prayer hall. The candles burned strangely, flames leaning sideways, all pointing toward the scroll. The abbot's hands trembled as he read the first verse aloud. Where flesh forgets flame, let name be ash. Let ash be soul. Let soul be seen. The hall darkened, not the room, but something inside it, like a shadow cast inward. Phra Rune whispered, "This is not meant to destroy the body. It is meant to force the soul to rise." Kamon looked at him, eyes heavy. What happens if it doesn't want to rise? Rune did not answer. The next morning they prepared the grounds. Not the cremation field, but the old Bodhi courtyard, where Master Sutham used to sit in silent meditation. The tree there was ancient, older than the temple, older than the village. Its roots crawled like veins across the earth, and some whispered it grew over the bones of monks who had taken their last breath beneath it. They placed 7 bowls of water, one for each realm of rebirth. They surrounded the area with black lotus petals, petals dipped in ash and mixed with candle soot. And they placed a mirror at the foot of the tree, not for vanity, but to reflect whatever might rise. The monks gathered before sunrise. They did not wear saffron. They wore white, the color of death, of letting go, of funerals. Their feet were bare, their eyes hollow. They formed a circle, facing inward, hearts pounding like drums silenced too long. In the center of the circle was not the body, but a relic. Master Sutham's chanting robe was laid out as if it still clothed him. On it rested a single unlit candle and the cracked bronze medallion that had once sealed the reliquary. Then the abbot began the chant. Om Savita, Om Savita. The Fire Sutra was not beautiful. It grated, warped the mouth, bent syllables in unnatural ways.
It felt like swallowing dry sand and chanting through blood. Yet they continued. Each voice added to the tremor. The wind thickened, the sky grew gray despite the rising sun. Birds fell silent, dogs whimpered, and then, as the chant reached its fourth verse, the mirror at the base of the tree began to fog, not with breath, but with smoke. Something stepped into the mirror's reflection, not a body, not a shadow, but a shape, cloaked, head bowed, arms clasped like a monk in prayer. It stood where Master Sutham once had, and then it opened its mouth, but there was no voice, only heat. The air tightened, the mirror cracked, silently, splintering like frost, and from the robes in the center of the courtyard, a single bead rolled outward, then another, then 10, 33. The entire mala unraveling as if it had never been tied. And from the final bead, ash, black, wet, smoking. But no fire had been lit. The monks stopped chanting. Their mouths would not move. Some had bitten their tongues. Others were bleeding from the nose. One had fainted. Another wept openly, eyes rolled back. Only Fra Rune remained steady. He crawled forward, touched the ash, and smeared it across his forehead, then whispered to the abbot, "He's not gone. He's still beneath the tree." They dug that night, by oil lamp, with bare hands, digging through roots, mud, and old bones, and they found something. A cloth bundle, tiny, wrapped tightly in silk blackened with time. They unwrapped it. Inside was a small wooden carving of a monk seated in meditation, faceless, smooth, hand-carved, and beneath it, a human tooth, still whole, still red at the root. Not a relic, but a binding. Rune fell back, gasping. "This is it," he whispered, "the anchor." Kamon shook his head. He made this. He buried it here. He bound himself here. Why? To hide something. They burned the carving, not with fire, but with chant. They surrounded it in a ring of lotus ash and repeated the fire sutra backwards. 7 monks, 7 voices, all bleeding from the mouth. And as the final syllable was spoken, the mirror shattered completely. The air released, and the roads at the center of the courtyard caught flame, without spark, without fuel. The flame was blue, and it screamed. By morning, only the ashes remained, but not his. The body was still sealed, still untouched, still waiting. The monks had only burned the soul's tether, not the soul itself. And so, the reliquary door still breathed, still pulsed, but now it was louder, because the thing inside was finally free to move.
Some prayers are not meant to be heard. They are meant to be locked away, folded in silence, buried beneath the threshold of the sacred. But when the monks of Wat Nong Tot spoke the Fire Sutra aloud for the second time, something else listened, and something else answered. It began just before the new moon. The temple had grown quieter in recent days, not peacefully so, but as if the very walls were holding their breath. The villagers no longer visited. Even the crows that nested in the bell tower had flown elsewhere, and still the reliquary door remained shut, but they could hear it breathing louder now, like something pacing on the other side, waiting for the right word to be spoken, the right name to be heard. Pra Ruan brought the scroll again, this time not to the abbot, but to all who remained. 5 monks, 1 novice, all trembling. He laid the scroll flat in the center of the Buddha hall, where statues lined the walls like silent witnesses. Candles were lit, but their flames leaned inward toward the text, as if the fire itself were curious. Luang Pai Kamon spoke first. "We will chant it again, in full, this time inside the reliquary." Ruan looked up sharply. "We sealed it. We sealed it with things we no longer believe in. But if we open it, he's already out. We're only pretending the door holds him." That night they unsealed the chamber. The thread bindings were gone. The nails had rusted through, though only days old, and the cracked bronze medallion had turned to black dust. They opened the door, and Master Sutham was still there, seated, upright, unburned, unchanged. His skin was dry now, like bark, but his robes were unwrinkled, as though no time had passed. His hands still rested in perfect meditation, but his head, it had tilted, just slightly, as if listening. The monks stepped inside, one by one, forming a circle around him. Pra Chai remained at the threshold, too afraid to enter. Kamon began the chant, Om Savita, Om Savita. The fire sutra poured from their mouths like smoke, uneven at first, then in rhythm. The air tightened, the floor grew warm, the candle flames outside the chamber bent toward the open door. As the second verse began, Master Sutham's lips moved. No sound, but unmistakable. He was mouthing the chant with them. Ruan's voice broke. Paitun fell to his knees, eyes wide. Kamon did not stop. He raised his voice, pushing deeper into the verses, even as his throat burned and his vision blurred. And then, just before the 6th verse, a scream. Not human, not animal, a sound that burst from the chamber like wind through a broken flute, piercing, high and mournful. The candle flames exploded outward. The Buddha statues in the main hall cracked along their faces, every one of them split from crown to chin. And Pra Chai, still outside the chamber, collapsed, seizing. They rushed to him. His eyes rolled, his mouth opened, and from within him came the voice of Master Sutham. Not his teachings, not his chants, but his plea. "You called me back. I begged to be forgotten, but now I remember." Then silence. Chai's body went still. The monks carried him to the novice hall, placing him on the mat where he used to meditate as a child. He did not wake. He only whispered over and over. The fire wasn't supposed to cleanse, it was supposed to erase. The abbot returned to the reliquary alone. The door was still open, but Master Sutham's body was gone. Only the robes remained folded neatly. And on the stone floor, a blackened footprint, still warm. From that night on, the chanting never stopped. It echoed from walls that once knew only silence, came from corners where no voice had ever stood. And when the monks sat to meditate, some swore they heard another breath join them, not beside them, but within them, a presence that now moved with their own lungs. Pra Ruan took the scroll and burned it in the altar fire, but the ashes reappeared in his begging bowl the next morning.
When he scattered them into the wind, they blew in a perfect circle and fell at his feet. That night, he dreamed of Master Sutham walking barefoot across a river of soot, carrying a flame that had no light. Behind him trailed shadows with no shape, only voices, each one chanting a piece of the Fire Sutra over and over, out of sync, like 1,000 broken echoes trying to remember who they were. And so the monks tried one final act. They placed the folded robes back into the reliquary, they lit incense, and they sealed the door again. And on the floor outside it, they painted a circle in their own blood, each monk giving a single drop from the finger they used to point during sermons. Kamon whispered, "Let him stay. Let no name rise. Let no memory return." It worked. For 3 days. No chants, no dreams, no footprints. Only silence. But it was not peace. It was hunger. And on the 4th night, every candle in the temple lit itself, all at once. And Prachai awoke screaming, not with his own voice, but Sutham's again. "You can seal the door, but the fire is in you now."
Temples are built on silence. But silence is not emptiness. It is layers. Footsteps buried beneath footsteps. Chants spoken over older chants. Names forgotten, not erased. Bones beneath stone. And sometimes the ground remembers what the living try to bury. It started with a crack, a hairline fracture across the floorboards of the prayer hall, thin like a splinter in a tooth, almost invisible. But the monks noticed, not because of the break, but because of the sound it made. At dawn, during morning prayers, it echoed softly beneath their knees, pop, 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 as if the wood were breathing, as if something beneath it were shifting, awaking. Pra Paitun knelt to inspect it. The wood was cold. But when he placed his hand against the crack, his palm came away smudged with soot. That night, the floor creaked louder. No footsteps, no weight, just settling, as if the foundation itself was uneasy. Luang Pikamon gave the order the next morning. "We dig." They began in silence. No ritual, no offering, just hands and shovels, pulling up planks older than memory. Underneath, they expected dirt, clay, maybe stones. What they found was charcoal-black soil that stank of metal and damp incense, like a fire that had never finished burning. They dug deeper, and then they found bones, small ones, delicate, too small to be a monk's, too soft in curve, too fragile in structure, child-sized. The monks stepped back. Even Rune, who had read of temple purges, of secret burials from the old days, had no words. They dug wider, and more bones emerged. Not one body, not two, but 16, all curled inward, fetal-like, wrapped in faded silk that flaked at the touch. None had been cremated, none had been named, and in the center of the circle of remains was an urn, unlabeled, jet black, smooth as glass. No lid, just sealed wax with red twine, twisted tight. Prachai, standing at the edge, whispered, "They were buried to keep something in, not to lay it to rest." They brought the urn into the prayer hall, set it before the Buddha statue, offered rice, water,
and 3 lotus buds. Then they waited. But no wind came, no chant, no vision, only heat. The prayer hall grew hot, not humid, not stifling, but radiant, as if the wood and stone had been left in the sun for hours. And still no one opened the urn, no one dared. That night, Luang Kamon dreamed of the urn. He stood in the middle of the hall, monks seated around him, chanting the Fire Sutra. He lifted the urn in his hands, but when he opened it, there was no ash, no bone, only a tongue, crawling, lashing, still wet. He woke screaming. The urn, untouched in waking life, sat quietly beneath the Buddha's gaze. But now, the red twine around it had begun to fray. Pra Rune brought out the old temple scrolls. They had no records of buried children, no records of deaths uncremated. But there was a rumor, a name, Me Kwan, the spirit of the rootless flame. An old folk tale passed between monks in forest monasteries, a spirit bound not to a body, but to fire that never fulfilled its purpose, a spirit that finds sanctuary beneath the feet of those who refuse to burn. It feeds on what fire leaves behind, smoke, ash, memory, and sometimes children. The abbot stood before the urn. He knew now. This was not just about Master Sutham's body. This was about what had been nested beneath him, what had been kept silent, what he had bound himself to. In a meeting that night, Kamon said softly, "He buried them long ago, and he sealed the urn so that he would carry the burden alone." "Why?" Rune asked. "To protect the temple, or to atone?" Paitun whispered, "Or to hide." No one slept that night, not just because of fear, but because the temple now hummed. Every wall, every beam, it vibrated, not from sound, but from memory, from the things too long buried, now clawing their way back through the wood. Some monks wept without knowing why. Others began to chant the Fire Sutra without realizing it. And Prao Chai, he walked barefoot into the prayer hall, stepped over the bones, and sat in front of the urn. He didn't touch it. He simply bowed and said through someone else's voice, "You were never supposed to see this. That was the agreement." Then he fainted. At dawn, the urn cracked. Not shattered, not opened, just a single fracture, clean down the middle, as if something inside had finally shifted. And from within it, the faint smell of burning cloth. Not fresh, old. A scent that once lingered in the crematorium on the day of Master Sutham's fireless pyre. And along with the scent, a sound, soft, delicate, children laughing. The monks sealed the bones back beneath the prayer hall, not out of denial, but reverence. They left offerings this time, candles, milk, dolls made of straw. They recarved the floor with sacred symbols. But the urn, they could not rebury it. It was awake, and it pulsed with a rhythm not unlike the reliquary door, not unlike a breath. Pra Rune wrote one final note in his journal. "We thought the danger was in the monk who would not burn, but now I wonder, was the fire trying to burn what he had buried inside him all along?"
Not all truths are written in scrolls. Some live in silence, in the gaze of someone who watches from the back of the temple,
never stepping forward, never praying aloud. And sometimes the truth wears the face of someone the dead had once loved. She was called Mae Sopa, a widow, bent with age, but with eyes like coal soaked in old tears. She lived just beyond the forest line, in a wooden house covered in moss, surrounded by a garden of overgrown basil and rusting wind chimes. She had not stepped inside Wat Nong Tat for 20 years, but on the evening the urn cracked, she came. No one summoned her, no one dared. She simply walked barefoot into the temple courtyard, placed her palms together in a trembling Y, and said, "He told me this day would come." Fra Ruen, still shaken from the discovery of the bones, was the first to greet her. "Who, May?" She looked past him, toward the reliquary, and then whispered, "Sutam." They took her into the old chanting room, lit no candles, asked no questions at first. But when she finally sat, hands folded on her lap, voice thin but steady, the truth spilled like warm oil from a cracked jar. His name was Sutam before it belonged to the temple, before he took the robe, before he asked me to forget him. She stared at the floor as she spoke. He was not yet 20 when we met. I was 17 and foolish. A pause, a breath. We lived in the village that used to sit where this temple now stands, before the monastics came, before the road was paved. She closed her eyes. He loved me, but he feared it. He said love was fire, and fire consumes. The monks listened, their silence taut. She continued, "I became pregnant. He wept when I told him. Then he disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he had shaved his head, worn white, said nothing, joined the temple. He gave himself to Buddha, but left his son to the wind. The baby came early, sickly, small, and he died before he took his first full breath. Sopa buried him alone beneath the fig tree that once stood at the far edge of the forest, near the field where the pyre was later built. I told no one. I did not scream. I held him until he turned cold, and then I folded him into the roots." Her voice broke, not with sobs, but silence. Years passed. She watched Sutam rise in the temple, become a teacher, a guide, a man of wisdom. But never once did he meet her eyes, until one night. He came to her door, no robe, just a man. He knelt, he wept, and he said only this, "There are more." "What do you mean?" Ruen asked, voice merely a whisper. Sopa looked at him then. The urn, the bones, those were not the only children who died. They were the ones he took in, the orphans, the sick, the ones who were left at the temple gates when no one else wanted them. She shook her head slowly. He tried to care for them, feed them, shelter them. But he failed. One winter, sickness came. Food was scarce, the temple was poor, and the children died. One by one. He buried them beneath the prayer hall, so the temple would not be shamed, so donors would not stop coming, so the land could still be called holy. Her hands clenched in her lap. But shame does not die when hidden, it ferments. Ruin asked, "And the urn?" So Pa closed her eyes. "It holds the one child who didn't die of sickness." The room froze. Even the breeze that passed through the slates in the walls seemed to pause. There was a boy. He grew different, saw things, heard things. He told Sutam the temple was cursed, that fire walked in dreams, that the chants were backwards. One day he screamed in the middle of morning meditation, said he saw mouths in the Buddha's chest, that they were trying to eat him. Sutam took him away, and the next day the boy was gone. He told me he had to, that the boy was going to bring ruin to the temple. Her voice for the first time cracked. I don't know if it was mercy or fear. After that, Master Sutam stopped smiling. He fasted more, spoke less, and began to write strange hymnals in chalk beneath his kuti, the hut where he lived. So Pa visited only once more. He didn't open the door. He simply whispered through the wall, "When I die, don't let them burn me, or everything will come undone." The monk sat in stunned silence, not from shock, but because the story fit too well, as if the body that would not burn was never the horror, it was the lock. And now the lock was cracking. So Pa stood slowly, her legs trembling. She looked again toward the reliquary. He loved the fire, feared it, tried to carry it, but in the end it carried him. Then she left. She never returned. But for days afterwards, the temple cats would sit in a row outside the prayer hall each night, staring at the floor, tail still, as if waiting, as if mourning. That night, Fra Chai spoke again, his voice low, different, not quite his own. She was the last person he loved, the only one who remembered him as a man. But even love cannot cremate what shame protects.
Some men leave behind legacies. Others leave behind names carved into wood or stone. But a few, rare and haunted, leave behind prayers to disappear. Master Sutham, the monk who refused cremation, had once asked for exactly that. Not sainthood, not remembrance, but to be forgotten completely. It was novice Fra Chai who discovered the journal. Hidden behind a loose plank in the base of the kuti, the hut where Sutham had lived alone for over 4 decades. The wood smelled faintly of candle oil and old blood. The space was narrow, dry, silent, sacred in its secrecy. Wrapped in faded saffron cloth, the journal had no name. Its pages were thin and yellowed. The ink, however, had not faded. Each word was still sharp, etched as though burned into the paper. And the first page read, "If you have found this, I have failed." The entries began like sermons, elegant, poetic, thoughtful. Meditations on impermanence, on karma, on humility. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. The entries grew shorter, sharper, more fragmented. Guilt began to bleed through every word. I buried them not for sin, but for silence. The temple is not built on stone. It is built on what we chose not to speak. Sutham had recorded everything, the names of the children, the years they came, the months they died. He described their dreams, vivid, strange, often shared. One child spoke nightly of a man with burning eyes. Another refused to sleep on straw, saying the fire inside the ground would eat her hair. And then, the last boy, the one May Sopa had spoken of. Sutham never wrote his name, only this. He looked at me with no fear, as if he knew I would fail him. And still, I buried him with prayers. I poured fire into his mouth, but he did not scream. He smiled. The journal grew darker, more frantic. Pages smeared, ink scratched out, symbols drawn in the margins, circles inside circles, lines that spiraled inward, eyes with no pupils, and over, one plea repeated like a mantra. Let the fire forget me. Let no mouth speak my name. Let no smoke rise from my bones. Pra Ruan read the journal 3 times. Each time he wept more. On the final page there was no text, only a burn mark, a perfect circle, as if a coal had rested there for hours, and yet the page remained uncharred around it. Kamon took the journal and placed it before the Buddha statue, but the next morning it was gone. No ash. No trace, only a whisper in the prayer hall. He wanted the flame to erase his shadow, but the shadow wanted to stay. That same day, the reliquary door cracked. A single, straight line, not wide, but deep. And the breath behind it grew louder, more rhythmic, like chanting beneath water. That night, all the monks dreamed the same dream. They were seated in a circle around a fire that did not burn, blue and still, like a wound. Sutham stood behind it, naked, pale, eyes hollow. He did not speak. He only wept, silent, ash falling from his mouth like snow. Each monk woke with soot on their pillows and the scent of burnt rice lingering in their nostrils. The novice Chai, still tethered to something unseen, whispered. He prayed to vanish, but when a monk chants for oblivion, something always listens, something older than death, something that does not believe in forgetting. The abbot took this as a sign. A final act was needed, not to cleanse, not to burn, but to release, not the body, but the name. At midnight, under a moonless sky, the monks gathered in the prayer hall. They placed Sutham's journal, now miraculously returned, before the Buddha. They lit no candles. Instead, they chanted the Paticca Samuppada, the 12 links of dependent origination. But at the final link, when the line should have been, "From becoming arises birth," the words changed in their mouths, without will, without intent. They spoke, "From silence arises fire. From fire, the name. From the name, the shadow. And the shadow will never burn." A breeze swept through the hall. Every candle in the temple snuffed out, though none had been lit, and the journal vanished once more, this time for good. Later, when Pra Ruan went to close the reliquary door once more, he paused. On the wall, above the monk's seated body, was a word scrawled in charcoal. Forget. Not a plea, not a warning, a command. The next day, the birds returned to the temple grounds. So did the breeze, and the chanting sounded once again like voices, not echoes, not breath, just monks, just men trying to live through what silence had left behind. But no one after that day spoke the name Sutham aloud, not in prayer, not in memory, not in fear. They referred to him only as the one who sat, and slowly his name faded from the walls, from the records, from the stones, just as he had prayed. But the fire would still not come, because forgetting is not the same as forgiveness, and silence once broken always remembers.
Relics are not just bones and beads. They are memories, sealed in matter. Each one carries the breath of prayer, the warmth of hands long turned to ash. They are holy because we believe they are, because we offer silence to them, because we let them watch us worship. But when something older than reverence passes near, even the relics begin to weep. It began on the last night of the monsoon. A thick, weightless fog blanketed Wat Nong Tat. It drifted through the windows like breath. Candles flickered in the meditation hall without wind, and the chimes in the Bodhi courtyard clanged, not in rhythm, but in warning. The reliquary door had not opened, and yet the fire beneath the Buddha's feet had gone cold. Pra Ruin was the first to notice the smell. Not rot, not incense, but copper, the sharp, unmistakable sting of old blood and burning coins. He followed it into the relic room, a chamber rarely visited, where fragments of bone and cloth had been stored in golden urns and silk-wrapped boxes. Some were said to be pieces of sainted monks. Others were never labeled, only marked with symbols and dates now too faded to read. The room was colder than it should have been. Not natural cold, but temple cold, the kind that comes only when something sacred has been disturbed. He bowed before the main shelf, and then he heard it. A soft rattle from inside one of the urns. He called for Kaman. By the time the abbot arrived, 2 more monks had joined him. The relics were beginning to move, subtle, almost gentle, a tilt of a box, a whisper of beads shifting inside a silk pouch. And then, the first crack. A statue of Pra Sivali, protector of travelers, split down the left cheek. Then another, and another. The wooden frame of a bodhisattva curled inward. The glass case of a prayer book shattered outward. The room trembled, not from beneath, but within, as if each relic carried something that now refused to stay dormant. The monks began to chant, softly at first, then louder. The Parita, the Heart Sutra, the Fire Sutra, each chant layered over the other. But the sound in the relic room grew louder. It was not screaming, it was howling, the sound of wind blowing through a broken throat. Relics fell from shelves, beads unraveled, bones cracked, not as if breaking, but waking. And then one voice among them, a child's, laughing. Pra Chai ran in barefoot, robes clinging to his damp skin. He pointed toward the reliquary hall. "It's not the relics, it's him. He's looking for his name." Ruin shouted, "We took his name." Chai shook his head violently. "No, you buried it. He's digging it up." At that moment, the bells began to ring, not from the tower, but from within the reliquary. A deep, slow toll. 1 strike, then silence, then 2, then 3. By the 7th toll, the monks were on their knees. The relic room now echoed with voices, not chanting, but repeating, over and over, "Sutam, Sutam, Sutam." As if the name had returned, uninvited, unforgiven, unburned. The abbot, trembling, stood. He walked into the center of the relic room, raised his arms, and shouted, "I remember your name, but I do not call it." The room went still. The air collapsed inward. And then all the relics howled at once. Not sound, but force. Wind blasted outward. Ash rained from rafters. The golden urns turned black. Every candle in the temple flared and died. And in the silence that followed, a single voice whispered from the reliquary. Too late. When dawn came, the relic room was empty. Not in appearance, but in presence. The air was hollow, the silence unnatural. The monks refused to step inside. Even Ruin, even Kaman. Only Prachai dared to kneel there, eyes closed, palms open, and whispered. He's pulling the past into his body. He's building a relic of himself, and when it's complete, he will burn only when we do. Later that day, a visiting monk from another province arrived, unaware of the events. He brought a gift, an old Om fragment said to belong to an Arhat, a sainted being. He entered the relic room to place it on the shelf, and screamed. The fragment in his hand had melted, without heat. It dripped like wax across his palm, leaving behind no burn, only emptiness, a clean hole where matter used to be. The monk fled. He left that night and never returned. But before he did, he whispered to Kaman, "That is no longer a relic room. It's a mouth." The abbot said nothing, only turned his gaze back toward the reliquary door and whispered a prayer he had never spoken aloud, not to Buddha, but to the man he once called brother. "Please, do not return in pieces." Some spirits linger, some spirits wander, but there are rare ones, those that refuse to pass on, not out of confusion, but conviction. They do not flicker like candlelight, they burn quietly, invisibly, and no fire in this world can consume them, because they have already burned themselves from the inside out. The monks no longer slept, not because of fear, but because their dreams had become doorways. Each time they closed their eyes, they found themselves seated in a hall of ash. No walls, no sky, only endless rows of saffron robes folded neatly in silence. At the far end, always the same figure, a monk, faceless, motionless, but breathing. And when they opened their mouths to chant, no sound came, only smoke. The reliquary was sealed again, not with wood or nails this time, but with salt. Lines drawn with trembling fingers, circles carved with rusted knives into the stone floor, whispered mantras written in chalk made from burned prayer books. But the air still pulsed, as though something inside was pacing, tasting, learning. Then, one morning, the firewood stack was gone. Every log used for temple rites, every branch meant for cooking or offering, vanished. In its place, beneath the Bodhi tree, was a single mound of ash, still warm, still breathing. And in the center of it, a child's sandal, blackened, melted at the edge. The villagers began burning their dead in secret, away from the temple, far from the chants. They whispered of bad luck, of cursed monks, of spirits that slipped into lungs and made mothers strike their children without knowing why. One man, a fisherman, found all his nets burned, though no fire had touched them. Another heard a voice beneath his house whispering, "I am not ash yet." The fear spread like wind in dry season, but the temple remained silent, because the monks no longer knew what to say. Fra Chai had stopped eating. He sat in the garden for hours, muttering verses no one recognized. Symbols appeared in his handwriting, loops within loops, spirals shaped like eyes. Once he spoke in a voice not his own. "You cannot cremate what chooses to remain unlit." He is no longer a monk. He is the prayer that never ends. Then came the self-immolation. It was not meant to be sacrifice. It was meant to be proof. A young monk, no older than 20, walked into the pyre circle. He carried a candle. He sat in the lotus position, and he whispered, "Let me burn where he could not." The others tried to stop him, but the flame touched him first. It roared to life, blue, silent. The fire did not consume him in agony. It wrapped around him like robes, soft, slow. He smiled, and then vanished. No scream, no bone, no trace. Only his sandals placed neatly beside the pyre, untouched. The monks trembled. This was no longer possession. This was invitation. The spirit that had refused cremation was offering himself to others, not to haunt, but to continue, to spread, to teach, to show that what would not burn could now live in those who still could. Fra Rien begged the abbot to flee. "Close the temple, seal the gates, let no more come." But Camon only stared at the reliquary, eyes hollow, hands trembling. "We opened the fire with our mouths, now we must speak it closed." That night they lit every candle in the temple, not for warmth, not for light, but to remind themselves that real fire flickers, that real flame dies. They chanted until their voices cracked. They bled from their noses. Their lips blistered from reciting the Fire Sutra without pause. And still the reliquary breathed. At midnight, the door opened by itself. No creak, no wind, just open. And standing in its frame was Master Sutam, or what he had become. Still robed, still upright, still unburned, but now glowing from within, like embers beneath skin. Eyes closed, palms open. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood, and the air turned hot. The monks fell to their knees, not in worship, not in terror, but in recognition, because what stood before them was not a ghost. It was the result of too much silence, too much shame, too much memory hidden in wood and ash and bone. And then Sutam spoke, not out loud, but within each monk's chest. "You lit fires to cleanse me, but I did not ask for forgiveness. I asked to be forgotten. Now I am remembered by everything that cannot burn." In the days that followed, more monks left. Some walked into the forest and never returned. Others shaved their heads again and took new names in temples far away. Only a few remained, watching, waiting, tending to a temple that had become a living reliquary, a place where ash gathered but never settled, where breath lingered in halls long after the voices had ceased, where one man stood at the center, still unburned, still chanting, still becoming something else.
Not all sermons are spoken from pulpits. Some are delivered without words. Some are breathed into the bones of buildings, into the air that thickens before dusk. And some sermons come from the dead, not to comfort, but to confess, not to teach, but to warn. On the night of the lunar eclipse, the temple stood still. Not just quiet, still. Even the wind held its breath. The monks who remained, only 4 now, sat beneath the Bodhi tree, their robes dusted with ash, their minds emptied by weeks of silence and decay. Prachai sat at the center. He had not spoken for 3 days. He had not slept. But he smiled often, too often. And that night he opened his eyes and said, "He will speak soon." The eclipse began just after the second bell. The moon darkened in slow, aching stages. A blood tint spread across the landscape, painting the temple grounds in deep crimson, as if the night itself were remembering something. The reliquary door opened. No one touched it. It simply invited. And from within, the body of Master Sutam stepped out, still upright, still unburned, but now his skin cracked with glowing lines, as though fire lived just beneath it. The monks did not run. They did not bow. They simply sat and waited. Because when fire speaks, it does not ask for reverence. It demands witnesses. He did not raise his hands. He did not open his eyes. But his voice came through every wall, every statue, every body. It entered the lungs. It stirred the blood. And it said, "You taught the Dhamma as a path to release. I buried truth so deep, it turned to root. I tended to the flames of others, but never offered mine. And so I became ash without fire." The Buddha statue behind him cracked, a line down the chest mirroring his own. The chanting began, not from the monks, but from the walls, the tiles, the soil, a low, vibrating hum, the Fire Sutra, but reversed, spoken backwards, as if time itself were pulling its breath in. Sutam continued, "I did not fear death. I feared being remembered as I truly was. And so I gave the temple everything except what mattered, my shame, my failure, my children. You call me a monk, but I was a pyre that never lit." His voice grew louder, not in volume, but intimacy. It moved inside the monks. It cracked their thoughts open like fruit. Each of them saw flashes. A boy kneeling in the rain, begging to stay. A girl coughing blood beneath a torn mosquito net. A hand, small and limp, slipping from the wrist of an older man. A burial, another, and another. Each monk wept, not for Sutam, but for what he could not carry. Then came the final words, simple, soft,
but infinite in weight. The fire was never yours to give me, because I am the fire, and I will burn only when every name I buried is spoken aloud." He opened his eyes. They were not human. They were coals. They were stars collapsing inward. And then he smiled, not with peace, but with release. His body began to glow. The cracks widened. His robe caught fire, without smoke, without wind. But he did not fall. He did not scream. He stood, burning, and whispered, "Say their names, or I will return." Then, like ash caught in breath, he was gone. No sound, no shadow, no bone. Only the robes remained, smoldering in a perfect circle. At the center of it, the broken bronze medallion from the reliquary door, melted, whole again. The monks sat in silence until sunrise, and then, one by one, they began to speak. Not Sutum's name, but the others, the forgotten, the buried, the unburned. The air grew lighter. The temple, still scarred, still humming, felt less burdened, but not empty, not clean, because some sermons never end. They echo, they bleed, they haunt. And for those who witnessed that night, there would always be a sound in the silence, a chant just beneath breath, a voice that once said, "I will burn only when every name is remembered."
Ash is not the end. It is the proof that something passed through flame and chose not to return. But what of those who sat beside the fire and waited? What of the ones who watched the flame flicker but never felt its mercy? Not all endings burn. Some must be set alight by name, by grief, by truth, finally spoken into silence. The temple had changed, not visibly, but in the way it felt when one crossed the gate. Lighter, heavier, both at once. The chanting had returned, but it was quieter, slower, as if each syllable now carried the weight of generations. The monks who remained, only 3, prepared one final ritual, not for Master Sutum, but for those beneath him. They dug again, this time without fear, without secrecy. They unearthed the bones beneath the prayer hall, still wrapped in silk, still curled like questions never answered. They cleaned them, washed them with rosewater, wrapped each in new cloth stitched by hand, and then, for the first time in temple history, they spoke the names, all of them, one by one, a name for each set of bones, a chant for each silence once kept. Even the nameless child from the sealed urn was honored. He was given a name, Niran. It means eternal. The villagers came, slowly at first, then in groups. None spoke loudly. They simply helped. Some brought lotus flowers, others brought candles. Even those who had feared the temple now returned with offerings, not out of reverence, but out of responsibility, because now they understood this was not a haunting, it was a holding. The pyre was built beneath the Bodhi tree. No ornate decorations, no drums, just wood, cloth, flame, and breath. The bones were placed at the center in a woven basket.
Beside them, the last of Master Sutam's robes and a note, written in Ruen's hand. It read, "He carried them alone. Now let the fire carry him." At dusk, the first flame was lit. It caught slowly, like a breath remembering how to exhale. Then it grew, gentle, patient, forgiving. No wind fought it this time, no chanting reversed, only a steady warmth. And then the smoke rose, and for the first time in all these weeks, it carried scent, not of burning flesh, but of jasmine, of sandalwood, and something else, something no one could name, but all of them felt, as though the fire was not destroying, but releasing. The bones turned to ash, the cloth curled inward and disappeared, and at the end only one item remained in the flames, a bead, the final bead from Master Sutam's mala. It glowed red, then cracked and vanished into dust. The pyre collapsed inward, smoke rising into the dark sky like a final breath let go. And from within that rising smoke came no face, no ghost, no whisper, only stillness, a kind of quiet that had not existed since before the fire refused, a silence that meant something had ended. The reliquary was never sealed again. There was no need, because the room was empty now, not just of body, but of weight, of memory that no longer needed to be held in bone. The Buddha statue was never repaired. The crack down its chest remained, not as a flaw, but as a reminder that even sacred things can break and still be beautiful. Years passed. The temple slowly healed. New novices arrived. The Bodhi tree blossomed more often. Villagers no longer whispered about the spirit that would not burn. Instead, they told a different story, about a monk who once carried too much, who sat beside the fire for years, until the day he was no longer alone, until the day every name was spoken, and only then did the pyre finally light.